we go.
Do I have time to do some Coke?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're excited to host tonight's event with Sebene Selassie, presenting her new book, You Belong, A Call for Connection. She will be talking with Mike Albo, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Sebene and Mike and the team at HarperOne for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Before we get started, we just have a couple of housekeeping things to go over. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see and hear you. They can see that you're here though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees at the top of your Zoom screen. The exact location will depend on what device you're using. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat, which is a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. But if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two little speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered tonight, so make sure that you are putting them there and not in the chat. We are recording tonight's event, so look for the video or audio versions on our social media channels later on. And importantly, tonight's featured book, You Belong, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to be able to offer actual shopping in our bookstore locations from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday, and you can purchase Sebene's book and many others on site. Or you can order online at greenlightbookstore.com for quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll put the buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer for this evening is writer and performer Mike Albo. His work includes the novel Tornado and the Underminer, co-written by Virginia Heffernan, as well as the novella The Junket and the short memoir Spermhood, Diary of a Donor. His solo work includes stage adaptations of Spermhood and The Junket. He is currently at work on a YA novel for Penguin Workshop, as well as completing a science fiction project. He'll be speaking with our featured author, Sebene Selassie. She has studied Buddhism for over 30 years. She received a BA from McGill University in Religious and Women's Studies and a master's from the New School, where she focused on cultural studies and race. For over 20 years, Sebene works with children, youth, and families nationally and internationally for small and large not-for-profits. Her work has taken her everywhere from the Tenderloin in San Francisco to refugee camps in Guinea, West Africa. She has been teaching meditation workshops, courses, and retreats for over a decade and is a popular teacher on the 10% Happier app. Sebene lives on the unceded Lenape territory in Brooklyn, New York with her partner. Her new book, You Belong, is a call to action, exploring our tangled relationship with belonging, connection, and each other. Publishers Weekly calls it a powerful work of spirituality and anti-racism. Full of practical advice and profound revelations, You Belong makes a winning case for resisting the forces that demand separation and reclaiming the connection and belonging that have been ours all along. Sebene is going to start us off with a reading and guided meditation from the book, and then she'll be talking with Mike and with all of you. Please take it away, Sebene.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Greenlight. Thank you, HarperOne. I asked Mike and Katie if I should do all the thank yous, but I think that would take up our whole evening, which could be the best use of our time, but I'll spare you that and just say there are so many people that made this possible. And I want to say a special thanks to my friend Mike for being here with me. And I want to say a little bit about the book. So some of you might know more about it and some of you might not, but it's a book obviously about belonging, but really our challenge with belonging to everything. So this idea that we are not separate, which is the truth of all great spiritual traditions, and it's also the truth of reality as evidenced by modern science. But we fall into this delusion of separation because we have these perceptual capacities that only show us difference on a mundane day. And also because those differences in our society have led to hierarchy, comparison, competition, domination, oppression, injustice. And so this book is really about a reckoning with belonging, really understanding and believing the truth of our interconnection, and also reckoning with the outcomes of those differences in our world today. So I want to begin by doing an honoring of native land. As Katie mentioned, I live on unceded territory of the Lenape people. And I always start with this honoring acknowledgement of where we are, because one of the ways that the dominant culture and our society in general keeps us in this delusion of separation is by not reckoning with our reality and where we are, like, genocide, uh, oppression, colonialism, misogyny, the things that have led to so much polarization, and connecting to actually the earth right here, right now, grounding to where we are, and naming and honoring peoples who are still alive and have stewarded this land for thousands of years is one way to start to reconnect to that belonging. I also like to name that I teach within a particular lineage and tradition, which also can get erased through these powers, through these systems of oppression. And so I studied in the Buddhist lineages for many years, and particularly in the lineages of the Thai forest tradition, my teacher's teacher, Ajahn Chah, the great Thai forest master, as well as their teacher, Master Hua, a Chan master, and to honor and name all of the Asian heritage Buddhists and Buddhism lineages that have contributed to my understanding of freedom. So this book begins with this idea that we must first ground ourselves to understand and experience our belonging. And I want to read from this chapter called Ground Yourself as a way to start. So sit back and here we go. Here are 4 things I know about belonging. Belonging is. We cannot do or undo belonging. We belong simply because we are alive. 2, belonging is in the present moment. It does not exist tomorrow or in another location. It is right here, right now, if you choose to open to it. 3, belonging is revealed through awareness. When we cultivate the capacity to know what is happening in any moment, then we can connect to belonging. 4, belonging is embodied. Even our most supernatural spiritual experiences are accessed through our senses. We don't find belonging by thinking about it in our heads. We can only experience belonging in these bodies. Meditation can help us understand all of this if you meditate with your body. If you've never tried mindfulness meditation, the instructions are not complicated. Be with your present moment experience without needing to grasp or reject anything, and without judging what's happening. If you've meditated before, you know how impossible it can feel. Perhaps you can relate to this. You long to begin a meditation practice, but you're convinced you'd be an instant failure. You don't believe you have the capacity to concentrate. You are too easily distracted, and it seems to be getting worse. You have a hard time reading an entire book. Or you've tried to start a practice countless times, but it always ends in frustration. You sit down to meditate, you use an object or anchor to focus on the breath or maybe a mantra. You start to practice, and for a few breaths or even a few minutes, you're able to stay with it. But suddenly, maybe many minutes later, often just a few seconds, you noticed you're lost in thoughts. It happens again and again. Fuck. Why is it that you never seem to feel the sense of peace or calmness that you believe is the goal? Wait, are you allowed to call it a goal? Welcome to meditation. Now try this. Connect with your body in whatever ways are most prominent in this moment. Can you feel your body right now? I mean, really, really feel your body. Are you thinking about your body, or are you sensing the body? How do you know? What sensations do you feel? Where? How do they feel? Are they vibrating, pulsing, tingling? Right now, for a few moments, close your eyes or keep them open and allow yourself to have a felt sense of the body. Not needing to grasp or reject anything, just sensing. Do you feel your feet on the floor or your butt in the seat? Do you sense the contact, the pressure? Now, what about the breath? Do you sense it? Where? Do you feel the sensations of breathing? The air flowing in and out, the belly rising or falling. Not changing anything, simply resting and staying with this for a few more moments. How does connecting with the body make you feel overall? Grounded, maybe? Many think meditation centers on the mind. Actually, meditation integrates the body. Embodied awareness is a holistic term for what is usually called mindfulness. The problem with mindfulness is we put the word mind right at the beginning of it. We conflate mind with brain, the head, thoughts. We tend to think of the brain as separate from the body and in need of some kind of connection. But isn't the brain part of the body? Where exactly are the mind and body disconnected? The skull? The neck? The mind and body are not truly separate. Those are just words we use to describe our experiences of thoughts and emotions versus the physicality of our life. But our consciousness is not limited to the body or mind. It's a knowing that encompasses both of those and much, much more. Embodied denotes that mind and body are fundamentally not separate. Awareness is the capacity to know both our physical, mental, and emotional experiences. Embodied awareness leads us to belonging.
That we're done. Yeah. That was beautiful. And I'm so glad you started with that, Sebene, because one of the things that really struck me about your book was I can't tell you how many times I've heard a yoga teacher say, imagine roots coming out of your feet and going into the earth. And I've always been like, gross. I don't want to imagine roots coming out of my feet. And I've always wanted another way to think about feeling grounded. And you simplify it so well, like that it's just gravity in some ways, you know? And I also love the fact that you open this book talking about how you put coffee up your butt. That's just a really important thing for everyone to know, because for all of you who don't know Sebene and I've known you since the 90s, and I'm almost a little pissed that people are all going to understand how incredibly great you are, because it's like I was there first. It's like how I liked the Bangles before everyone else in high school, and now everyone's going to like the Bangles, and like you're the Bangles to me. So I'm a little pissed. But you are one of the most important people in my life, and I'm really, really psyched about this book. But I want to ask you about, okay, so the structure of the book is really interesting to me, because you kind of begin talking about the delusion of separation and the delusion of what keeps us from belonging, and how belonging is really we all belong, but that what we have to learn is to address the unbelonging. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. You said it better, but
Well, I think we're taught that to feel that we don't belong. So the truth is that we belong. We belong to each other. We belong to it all. But this delusion of separation, so there's our ordinary senses that actually show us that we're different and separate, but the underlying fabric of reality is actually interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that doctrine of two truths, which are two truths. I don't know why I pronounce it like that.
It just sounds like a Zoom problem. Don't worry. Go for it.
Two truths, the absolute truth and the relative truth. And the thing about them is that they're both true. So we are interconnected. We're not separate. The fabric of reality is this energetic, non-separation interconnectedness. And we also have differentiated experiences. We have different bodies. We have different realities. And kind of grappling with those true truths is our challenge.
And then you discuss domination, that being like one of the key factors towards our unbelonging. And domination can come in many different ways, including, of course, racism and other elements. And I really was interested in the moment in your book when you were going to meet the President Carter and were wearing your dashiki and got shamed for wearing your dashiki. And you were like in second grade, is that right?
I was probably in third grade, maybe. Yeah.
It's so weird.
No, actually, I was younger because Carter. When was Carter?
That was 78, 70.
Yeah, so I was probably third or fourth grade.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 76. I think he came in.
It was interesting to me to hear that, because I feel like, for most of us, for me at least, even in my weird gay brain, like I felt like I belonged until around third grade. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of children who might be raised, at least with some sort of support, felt that way. And it's interesting that there was a breakage point for you, or your moment of realization kind of happened around then. Do you feel like that's a common thing?
That's interesting. I never thought about it in terms of age, but definitely in terms of experiences. And maybe that's when, people kind of separate into friends groups and teasing, and also if especially kids who are in mixed environments start to experience racial aggression, and Black kids in white neighborhoods, which was me, start to experience anti-Black racism directed at them. Mm-hmm. But like a lot of children, kids of color, Black kids, and I don't know, for you as a queer kid, it might come earlier because there are so many messages from society and kind of puzzles to understand about the world. So yes, we all come into this world feeling that sense of belonging, depending on the nurturance in our immediate environment. That might break sooner or later, but definitely different people have different challenges with that and ruptures to that depending on where they are. So even though I didn't experience directly racial aggression until I was older, I witnessed that racial aggression towards my brother or, around me kind of in the neighborhood. So I think the circumstances definitely make a difference.
Yeah. And you grew up around DC or in DC, correct?
I grew up in DC, but I grew up in kind of a suburban part of DC. Right on the Maryland border during my elementary school years. So it was an upper middle class white neighborhood. And so my neighbor worked for Carter, for example, and invited us to the White House. Right.
It's a weird paradox. And I feel like you discussed this a little bit, like how we all develop these identities. But at the same time, we all belong. And part of me is like, what I love about you is that you are this Ethiopian American immigrant who is a complete weirdo, and that's why I've always loved you. And I wouldn't want you to be in any other way. And for me, thank God I found a gay identity, or I would be a really creepy priest right now. Do you know what I mean? So, so like, where does our identity end and belonging begin, or is that a wrong construct? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because in some ways, when we're talking about belonging, to everything, we can sort of lean too far into the absolute truth, or want to cling to kind of the harmony of we're not separate. And that will erase our differences. And our differences are not only oppression or challenges, our differences also are the beauty of our different cultures, the beauty of our different realities. And so there's this another paradox of sort of not erasing difference in our quest to understand our interconnection. At the same time, kind of we can lean so far into the difference and really get lost. This is what's happened for me, get lost in the entanglement of
Identity.
these divisions.
Right.
Yeah, of identity, but not because there's a problem with identity, but because there's a problem with oppression that comes from people not being able to deal with the difference of identity. And that's where domination comes in. So I can get really lost in the entanglements of what society has created around identity. And so there's this balancing act. And for each of us, we sort of need to see where we're leaning because we find it more comfortable, or we find one of them, more disturbing, and really start to be able to grapple with both. That's why I kind of keep mentioning that belonging is really a reckoning for all of us.
Is it, I wrote down this question, then I was like, I feel like this isn't the right way to phrase it, but was there an aha moment for you when you realized belonging was, when you realized your belonging? Or maybe that's the wrong question, just because it's a constant unfolding, the way that, I feel like one other thing that I really liked about your book is that you're kind of like, there's no result, just relax, just do it. I mean, it's not like I'm going to finish this book and yay, and that's that's part of our consumer culture, is to like feel like we're getting somewhere. But was there a moment in your training when you were like, oh, I belong?
Yeah, I think that there's a freedom that can be experienced through spiritual practice that really opens us to that sense of belonging. I'm having a hot flash right now, and there's a
I
lot
want to
about
talk
hot
about your hot
flashes in
flashes.
this book.
There is.
Just so people know, that there's the window into the fact that belonging, and I use belonging as a synonym for freedom, for joy, for love, really, that there's that possibility of opening up to that in any moment. It may only last a nanosecond, it may last a week, but that feeling of peace, of liberation, of relaxation, of ease, we find through our spiritual practice. And we find that we can find it when we feel interconnected and really can feel that lack of separation. We also can find it in feeling that beauty of difference. And so we don't need to kind of lean only to one side to experience that sense of belonging. It can be in friendship and relationship, and it also can be in a meditative state.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is, belonging is a deep exhale, a release of vigilance. That was a beautiful sentence.
Yeah.
It's
that vigilance is, that's what I kind of started feeling as conditioning at that age. Like just as you were describing, in elementary school, when I realized that other people didn't bring, Mr. sandwiches to lunch in their lunchbox, or, that my dashiki was not welcome,
right,
according to, my mean neighbor.
Right. And I loved how you described how worried you were about the smell, the way your house smelled. And then I remembered, it's weird because I remember being a kid and going into other families' homes of other races, and they always had strange smelling houses, but I was like more curious than clenched about it. But there's definitely this moment in our culture when that becomes a judgment. Do you know what I mean? And I wish I could pinpoint it to the exact age or something, but it felt, I don't know, you brought up a lot of memories of me going to, like, the weird French family down the street and their strange house, and like how it smelled, but being more curious than judgmental about it. But I wanted to ask you about your hot flashes, because you talk about them a lot, and you talk about how to love them, and and how you kind of go through a litany of loving different parts of yourself in the book. And I was curious about that because I want to ask how you love something like that. And if is it, okay, if I had to put it towards me, I would be like, I have to love my adult acne, right? So, so how do I love that? Do I say like, it's because it reminds me that I have skin and that I have a body and that, yay, I have a body? Like, I have to really go there. I can't just say, I love it. You know what I mean? And I'm curious how you got in there to love your hot flashes.
I think one of the fundamental kind of truths of freedom and so of belonging is not being in contention with reality. And by that, I don't mean that we don't want to change things that are unjust. You know, we can meet our experience and see what the appropriate response is to the moment, but we're not in contention with the moment. So we're not in contention with the past. We're not in contention with our our history or our genetics or our illness, our experience. And so when we can accept this moment exactly as it is, there is sort of a natural love that comes up. And I found that with hot flashes, a lot of my frustration with them was that I didn't want them to be happening. But they are happening. It's just the truth of
Right.
reality, right? I had my ovaries removed. I was pushed into premature surgically induced menopause. And that's just the truth of my experience. And so to be in contention with that creates unease. You know, it creates a lack of freedom. It creates some feeling of not belonging to my body and to my
Mhm.
experience. So that for me is sort of the intellectual part of that understanding. And then we practice not being in contention with what's happening. So we notice how we respond to it, and we notice that there's resistance, we notice that there's frustration, we notice there's tension. And this is the other paradox of practice, is that when we start to just relax with it, allow, receive what's happening, there is that natural um, acceptance and even love that will arise.
You're making me understand that loving it isn't that hard.
It's not,
Yeah,
it's not something outsized that we have to create. It's actually
right.
just being with it moment to moment.
Um, I thought about some of the hardest times to connect with belonging. The subway, Grinder. If you've ever been on Grinder, that's a really hard time to not a place you can feel belonging. Sickness, and I have so many memories of you going through chemo, going to visit you. And I remember one in particular when you were in St. Vincent's, and I wish I could remember the details, but it was like this House of Cards thing that happened where I don't know if you had even started radiation yet, but there was like you had been tested for something, and then something else fucked up, and then bing bada boom, and you were like being intubated, and then you were stuck in the
It was so
Chinese
nuts.
wing.
Yeah. And I had a twisted intestine, like completely crazy string of events that led to kidney failure eventually. Yeah.
Right.
It was
Now,
just
and
bananas.
yes, and I remember walking in and you had been intubated, so you had this fucking tube in your nose, and I looked at you and you were just like, look at this. Like you were just like, I can't, what am I doing? Um, and it was it was weirdly funny. Like that's the thing.
It
Um,
was funny.
but how at the times of of the most difficult times to feel belonging but also to love your body, how did you do it? Was it, and let me just front load that question a little bit, because you come up, there's the five, oh shit, what's it called,
Daily recollections.
five daily recollections, which seems like it might be part of this practice that you taught yourself or did to sort of get through that time. Maybe you could explain that a little
Yeah.
bit.
So, practice is a huge part of how I survived 3 cancer experiences and many, many surgeries and treatments and a lot of illness. And I really, it's hard for me to imagine how people do that without some sort of grounding, some kind of practice, some kind of um, way to be with their experience without just fighting it all the time. So for me, that daily meditation practice was really kind of the training ground for experiencing a lot of physical pain, for example, and not needing to, just constantly numb it with pain relievers. I was working the entire time. I was also going through treatment. So I had to go to work and still experience a lot of pain and still go to meetings and, still do my job. So not being in contention with that experience was a lot of it. And I'm not saying it was always successful at that, but I was continually practicing that, recognizing that this was nature too, the 5 recollections which have us recollect the fact that we will grow old, we will get sick, we will die, and we will lose things that are close to us, and that there is a karma to our experience. I don't know why I got sick. I don't know, why certain experiences happened to me, but it doesn't help me to be in contention with the past, including my, intergenerational past. That is the truth of this moment, and opening up to it with some measure of ease is part of finding freedom, regardless what's happening. Then the other thing I think that was been really, really important for me is to just recognize that it's not punishment. There's a way in which, especially with something like cancer, we feel like this should not be happening. It's a mistake. And it's like, well, it happened. So it's not a mistake. And we don't even have to make it a problem. We can take care of ourselves and try our best to get well. But again, not being in contention with the reality of this moment is so much of the practice.
By the way, audience, we're going to open up for questions in about 8 minutes. So if you wanted to type out some questions, now's the time. I wanted to also ask you about, so some of my best memories are hanging out with you in Prospect Park over the years and talking with you through many different phases of our lives. And I remember one time, it must have been early on in one of your first retreats, and it was one of your first silent retreats, and you were like, could not get over the fact that you couldn't have gossip. This is how I remember it. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But you were just like, I just need to feel gossip around me. And like, you really wanted to look in people's like medicine bags and just understand everyone around you. And I just love, I just love those real moments of your practice, which also come into this book. Like it's just such a real book about a normal person who isn't floating on air, learning how to practice. And I also remember a story you told me about, you were, I think, at a retreat with Tara Brach, and you were late, and you stressed the shit out of it, and you were like, you got really, really upset about it, and then you went to her and we're just like, I'm so sorry, and she was just like, I think you gotta kind of look into that a little bit,
No, what actually happened is that it's true. I missed an interview appointment because I had mixed up the time or something.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to like a shame attack and, just paced around, like feeling completely terrible about myself. And this happens on retreat, like normal things just become outsized emotions. And she came and found me, and she said to me, before I said anything to her, she said, please don't freak out about this. And I was like, already done. Did that.
It's only you could get stressed out at a retreat. You know what I mean?
Everybody gets stressed out on retreats.
Yeah. Well, and also it was really interesting to hear that everyone can be racist on retreats. There are, you know what I mean? There are moments when people's real shit comes out, including the person you describe a moment where you were assigned to get up on the lead cushion and ring the bell, and how much, you call it like stereotype. There's a term, stereotype threat. That's it. Thank you. When you feel like no one thinks I should be here, and then you get all these feelings start compounding, and you're sitting there and you're so super nervous. And then afterwards there was a bit of a discussion circle, and this white woman was like, I didn't think you should be up there. And then she was laughing. You're like, haha, funny.
Yeah, stereotype threat, it's interesting because it's constructed by, the term comes from a study of Black people who were reminded of their race before taking a test and did worse on the test if they were reminded of it. And I always point out that we don't need to be reminded of our race or gender or difference if we are part of oppressed identities. And so we're constantly walking around with that. But those threats and those stereotypes are not made up by us. They exist because they're projections that we actually feel. And so what I realized is that what I was feeling, was probably generated because of the experiences I'd had through my life, but it was also generated because of the energy I was receiving from the group.
Mm.
And the next time that happened, I sort of allowed myself, I ended up wearing a t-shirt that my friend Jackie had given me that said "Allow Love" on it. And I'd forgotten that that's what I was wearing until I kind of looked down at one point and said, oh, okay, I don't need to allow this. I can actually allow love. And that was a turning point for me. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, the questions are coming in. Here's a question from someone with the first name that I love, but I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to. But what can a Sangha look like now in these times? And do you have tips for finding or building one in places where meditation practice and interest isn't widespread? Maybe you should explain what a Sangha is first.
Yeah, so Sangha is the Pali term for community. So it refers to Buddhist communities, but a lot of people use it to refer to spiritual communities, meditation communities in general. And there's so much going on online right now. It's kind of amazing and can be overwhelming. So if people are in places where it's hard to kind of cultivate that physically, as it is for most of us, starting to consider what our interests are. Maybe there are affinity groups, so sanghas that are coordinated around particular affinities or interests. There are sanghas that are, focused on social justice or environmental justice or racial justice. And there are sanghas that focus primarily on devotional practice or other practices. So seeking that out, kind of going where our heart takes us and where our longing is. I mentioned in the book that I was journaling many years ago, and I was kind of writing about belonging, and I realized that belonging is an imperative, belonging. And so really kind of coming into connection with that longing, those deepest longings we have for our freedom and for our wellness, and letting that lead.
Yeah. I talk about my yoga classes a lot, but I remember billions of years ago in the 90s, my teacher saying the longing for love is love. And I was like, yes. There's a really great question here from someone who wants to know if this book would be accessible for a teenager who had recently decided to transition. And maybe we could open that up a little bit and just talk about transgender meditation. I don't know if there's some kind of wider discussion that we could have about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great trans Buddhist resources right now. And there's a book that came out last year called Transcending. That's really wonderful. So that might be a resource. Many of the people who wrote for that anthology are meditation teachers themselves. So just encouraging this person to maybe check that out and see who there might be offering things online. There are recently happened the first trans retreats, meditation retreats online.
Oh, great.
Too. So, someone just posted transbuddhist.org. And this book, I think it's accessible for teens. I try to write it in very accessible language in general. Although I use some big words, I try and break them down.
Like epistemicide, that was a new word for me. That's a great word. That's a powerful one too.
The killing off of knowledge and
knowledge,
ways of knowing. And so I use that to refer to the ways that indigenous knowledge and wisdom has been suppressed, has been killed off. And
it kind of reminds me, you're the person who taught me about #wellness so white, like the whiteification of therapies, alternative therapies.
Yeah, that lineage acknowledgement I did at the beginning is kind of helping to counter that when we sort of just show up and start teaching without really naming where the teachings are coming from and what the exact lineages are, we're just participating in, a white supremacist continuation of this colonization of resources, this resource being a spiritual one.
Speaking of gross things, I have a question for you. You have this, there's a lot of discussion in the book about self-love and like loving yourself and really deeply doing that work. And I think all my life I've had a problem with that because I see so much self-love that looks like narcissism, especially on this app called Instagram. Like there's just like there is so much. And I think what I learned from your book was that there's a difference between that and when self-love works, or I don't know if that's the right word, it's beaming outwards. You know what I mean? It's not a selfish act. It's a beaming, generous act. And I wondered if in practice there is some sort of term about what the wrong kind of self-love or what narcissism is in Buddhism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a whole conversation to have about self as identity and the teaching of anatta and not self, which I don't go into in this book because, as one of my friends told me, I have to save something for the next book.
Yeah, good point.
And it's a lot to unpack. But I will say that the self-love chapter comes right in the middle of this trajectory that I give of ground yourself, know yourself, love yourself, connect yourself, be yourself. And that was very intentional. Originally, like love and know were flipped, but there's a real way in which after we sort of ground ourselves are able to be with our experience without being dragged every nanosecond into stories and thoughts, then we can begin to start to know ourselves without reactivity. And that knowing ourselves to me is like so closely connected to loving ourselves. They're a feedback loop, those three. And so the love comes from actually being able to see ourselves clearly and not being in contention with what we find. I think a lot of self-love comes from this false idea that there's something wrong with us. And so our spiritual practice just falls into the same kind of pathology of productivity, to use a friend's phrase, Shayla Davison's phrase. It becomes kind of part of this pathology of our culture to like do more, be better, get here, get there. And there's something really consumptive about that. Like our growth and our self-development becomes just another kind of thing that we can consume the same way we consume objects or experiences. So self-love that comes from, oh, I really see clearly. And I talk a lot about, all of my faults, and all of my challenges, but I'm not in contention with those. I don't want to feed them. I'm not loving my envy or loving my know-it-allness, but I'm loving myself even when I witness those things. And that's actually what leads to that outward projection of love.
Anuradha Bhagwati asks if you could talk about the role of rage and expressing rage in belonging / Western Buddhist practice. It's kind of an interesting question, just about anger, I suppose. Like, where does anger fit?
Yeah, thank you, Anuradha. Nice to hear you, or hear you through Mike. It's funny. I don't talk a lot about rage in this book, and I thought about that, especially. I know I see people's names here. I know many of you are familiar with Lama Rod, who's a wonderful teacher and a friend, and he just wrote a book called Love and Rage. And I thought about it. I was like, rage and anger is not something even I really reference that many times. And it might be because that's not kind of my chief challenge. That might be because it's suppressed and I'm not dealing with it. I'm not saying I don't have anger or have issues with anger. It's just not my go-to emotion. There's sort of this typology, very simple typology system in Buddhism of like aversive types and greedy types and deluded types. And I always feel like I'm greedy with deluded rising. Aversion is not my go-to. So I don't speak a lot about rage, just so people know, and anger. But I feel like regardless what the challenge is, we meet it in the same way. And especially how we're gendered and how we're racialized, our rage, our anger can become really problematic for society. So I have sort of tried to look at, did I kind of suppress rage and anger because, I picked up very quickly, because immigrants and Black people and women pick up really quickly what we can do to survive and succeed. I realized that being the angry Black woman was going to be problematic, especially in the spaces I was in as a child and as a young adult, which were mostly white. So, reckoning with how society treats rage is really important to see, and see how that could be affecting whether we have a clear contact with our own rage or upset. And then practicing with it is sort of the process of transmuting that, let's say. So allowing it to express itself without overwhelming us. And, again, Lama Raj just wrote a whole book about this. So I would recommend that if that's something that you really want to explore.
You're reminding me how our friends Lisa and Victor and I basically are gurus, because we came up with a theory about that you're either sad, angry, or afraid. And Lisa and I are both afraid with sad rising, and Victor was angry with sad rising.
I remember when you guys did that, and I am also afraid with sad rising.
Afraid with sad rising. Yeah, I think I'm definitely afraid with sad rising. So Amanda, the lovely Amanda Tobier, I'm going to say her last name like that because it just sounds better. Is that how she pronounces her last name?
Tobier.
Okay, it's Tobier to me. One of my favorite stories that you tell, this is her talking, is about the ants at the meditation retreat. Can you talk a little about how observing something as tiny as an ant was so meaningful to you and to us all?
Thank you, Amanda, my brother. I want to name, first of all, why I'm so happy to do this with you, because, over the years, you have given me so much support around writing, which is not my profession, and really, was barely a hobby for a long time, but something that I just longed to do. And when I took classes, you always gave me just all this advice and took me really seriously. You really treated me like a real writer. And it's just that's one of the main reasons, besides the fact that I adore you, that I wanted to share this with you, because that's just been the world to me, really.
That's so nice to hear.
And I say that now because I wrote this essay in a class about ants. I don't know if you remember this, Mike, and I shared it with you, and you were so kind, because as usual, it was, very repetitive in my writing, and you were just like, well, maybe you could cut a little bit. But in this essay, I talk about this experience I had on retreat in Thailand it was 20 years ago, actually, over 20 years ago. And I was heading to the retreat. I'd been on Koh Phangan for a month, and I told people that I was going to Wat Suan Mak for a few weeks of practice. And everyone kept saying, "Oh, the ants. Oh, Wat Suan Mak, the ants." And I had no idea what they were talking. I didn't know if it was code or what. But when I got there, it was a 10-day silent retreat, the first retreat I did. And over the days, I realized there were just this world, a whole matrix of ants that was happening. Over there were the fire ants. Don't go over there, they'll bite your feet. Over here were just these giant, not threatening, but huge ants. And there were ants that had gathered around a dead, very, very large insect. And they in the way ants do, marvelously had gathered and tried to carry it up the tree into a hole, but they got all the way up the tree and they couldn't get it in. And over days, I had started watching them. I was doing walking meditation over there. And so after every sitting period, I would just rush over to the ants and just watch them. And pretty soon, 20 people, every walking period, were going over to the ants, because the ants then came back down and split apart this bug into different pieces and then slowly put it in the hole. And it was just such a magnificent experience of nature and, in community, that we were supposed to be practicing in a particular way, but we were practicing because we were so present. We were in awe and wonder, which is really, I think a real expression of mindfulness or embodied awareness. And we felt really connected. We felt really protective of these bugs that we maybe would have stepped over or stepped on if we hadn't sort of witnessed this miraculous event through them.
It's really, and you keep coming back to it in the book, just those minor moments. And I really love this moment in the book when you feel your left foot. I think you're washing dishes and you're just like, what the fuck am I doing with my foot? And it happens like it sounds like such a selfish and like minor act, but you really express very well how important it is to feel your body, and what wisdom can be led from just simply feeling your body. And that was such a profound moment to me when you were washing your dishes in the book and you felt your foot and realized that you've been curling it in some weird ass way for all these years.
Yeah, and there are so many messages being given to us all the time from the body, but we're so caught and entangled in our thoughts that we can't feel them. And just in the same way that I was picking up on the energy of the room, we're constantly picking up on the complexity of our lives, both internally and externally, and we can tap into it, but we need to connect to the body in order to do that.
That is a good segue to the next question from Liz Ikiriko, sorry. She can't wait to hold the book your book in her hands. She wants you to speak to the idea of a release of vigilance. I think, this is her speaking, I think of this as a letting go of a sense of protection, especially as a Black woman. This internal need to protect myself is so strong. It's hard to imagine a way to choose to letting go.
I so appreciate that, because to me it really speaks to the fact that sometimes we do need to protect ourselves. So opening to our experience and opening to connection doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries. And I've experienced this many times in my life, that the saying goes, Sharon Salzberg told me the other day, who first said it, now I can't remember who, but that we don't need to kick anyone out of our hearts, but we can draw boundaries in our lives, so we can kick them out of our lives, but not our hearts. And that, I think, it goes for individuals and also just culturally. Like, we don't need to keep putting ourselves in spaces or places. And I have left situations, I've left communities that I didn't feel were supportive to me or to others around me. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I hate those people. It just means that I don't want to put myself I don't want to waste my energy, or maybe waste is not the right word, but I don't want to expend my energy in those ways. And that's really important to understand for ourselves. And, there is a toll, especially if we are on the margins and we witness so much. So I have this term, I think I coined a term, by the way.
Good.
Semiotic vigilance. Like, as people of color, as marginalized people, we read so much. Like, read as in I'm a read. Like, but also read and just understanding so many realities. We move through so many spaces, especially if we are in relationship with the white world in an intense way. And so there's a lot of processing going on all the time, and it's exhausting. So some of the desire to release the vigilance is just because we're tired. And we need a break from all of the processing we have to do just to survive from the margins.
Yes, and last winter when you turned me on to I'm going to get it wrong, the NAP project.
The NAP Ministry.
The NAP Ministry. What a lovely project. I love that. Just giving people of color a chance to sleep for once in their lives. It's amazing. Okay, one more question here. We only have 5 minutes, but I work with, this is Tammy LeDrew. I work with several clients who are trauma survivors. Some seem to begin to move through the trauma. Others seem to live in a victim mentality. Can you speak to how we can help people deal with reality, with reality and address their clinging to being a victim?
I'm just looking for Tammy's question because I got distracted. Hold on.
It's all right.
Trauma is complicated, and I really don't go into trauma too much in this book, particularly lived trauma of our present lives. I do reference intergenerational trauma to just acknowledge that that is, in a way, a wisdom that's handed down to us so that we can navigate these worlds. Like we inherit this information or this data, whether it's trauma or resilience. So whether it's, these challenges or whether it's these strengths, but in a sense, the challenge of inherited trauma is a strength because it teaches us, how to protect ourselves and, how to draw boundaries. So I talk about trauma in that sense. I don't go into a lot of present life trauma because that is it needs a book unto itself. I couldn't do that in a paragraph or a chapter. And so Tammy, to really kind of consider what your clients are talking about when they talk about trauma, and to steer them towards practices, resources, and ultimately solutions that can support them where they're at. So if we're talking about kind of what sometimes called small t trauma or everyday trauma, whether we're talking about intergenerational trauma that can also be very deep and needs to be processed, usually with a therapist. And one thing I do mention is approaching this with a lot of care and also somatically as well. So trauma lives in the body. It's not something we can figure out in our heads. And so working with trauma-informed therapists who really do work with the body, I think is really important.
I'd like to just end with switching gears a little bit, because you talk about embodiment, but then you talk about disembodiment, and you talk about disembodied sex, and having disembodied sex in your 20s and 30s. And I was like, yeah, I understand that. I was doing that until March 2020. But I want to sort of, I don't know, just talk about embodiment in a sexual way too, because you kind of, do you talk about the erotic a little bit? And you mentioned that amazing essay by Audre Lorde about the erotic.
Yeah, I think one of the there are many results and legacies from white supremacy and patriarchy and colonization, and one of them is this dismissal and denigration of the body and how that shows up in our spiritual practices as well. And there's that great essay, The Uses of the Erotic as Power by Audre Lorde, that I reference and talk about as a guide to us understanding that the erotic is really that window into, or that doorway into, our sensory experience of embodiment. And the way she talks about it is not just about sex, although it's not about sex. She's really talking about our capacity to feel. So I mentioned that, I had a lot of sex that I wasn't really feeling. And for a long time, it kind of, that male gaze, I had internalized that. Talk about semiotic vigilance. I was sort of experiencing myself as an object rather than having a subjective experience of sex.
Yeah. I'm so glad we could end with talking about sex. That was my one goal, was to make sure that we talked about fucking by the end of this. I started with Coke, we end with fucking.
That's what I was counting on, Mike.
So see, yeah. Okay, so let me just close by saying you are amazing. This book is great, and you have taught me so much. I'm so grateful for you. And now that you've taught us all how we're all meditators, I need to tell you that you are a writer. You are a writer. This is gorgeously written. There's so many beautiful sentences in it, and I can't wait for your next book, and I'm so excited this book is out there in the world. And
thank
I'm
you,
very,
Mike.
very
That means
grateful
the
for you.
world to me. Thank
Oh.
you.
Thank you all for coming. This is going to be the weird thing where we all just leave, and it feels like like we all just got jerked off barely. So it's oh, Katie's back.
I am back. Although you were doing a great job with the ending yourself. But I want to thank you both.
Happy ending.
Fantastic discussion. And thanks to everybody for coming. If you missed any of tonight's event, or if you just want to watch it again, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, so look for it there. And don't forget to buy your copy of You Belong in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, and thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Mwah.